Today in the show, we have Emma BOLTZ, a multifaceted designer in user interaction and interface, web design, illustration, and brand based in the Pacific Northwest. She started her college education journey as an art major, but quickly fell in love with design technology application and user-centric nature. This background allowed her to grasp color theory, composition, and materials deeply, while also processing the technical skills for her design background. Emma is passionate about understanding her clients and users to design impactful, lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show, Emma. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm super excited. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited for this. I'm sure going to be a very good conversation.
Excellent. We like the excitement. Go ahead and start with the question we always start with, which is, can you tell us a little bit about your creative origin story? How did your journey begin?
I've been thinking about that. It's a bit of a hard question because I feel like I'm in my origin right now. I don't think I've really truly begun outside of my world. Like, I haven't come outside my comfort zone quite yet. I am currently a design student, so I'm still kind of like workshopping in terms of what I want to do creatively, I guess. And the thing that resonated with me most is something that my professor said, which is most people are creative. And if you get up into a creative industry, you just figured it out sooner than anyone else. So I guess that's kind of how I feel of like I've always had a good environment to be just naturally creative. And my mom is a super big supporter of like the arts. She was an art teacher. And so I just grew up doing a lot of little projects and creative activities, and she's always super supportive of that. And then, my dad is, as Chris knows, is like wildly creative and super, super smart. And so he was also like just a really cool person to watch, like be creative, because like my mom and dad had two different, completely different creative processes. And so I was like lucky enough to kind of get exposed to both of those. And then from there, I had just such a strong draw to wanting to create things and wanting to solve problems and wanting to make art and fun sculptures and all kinds of creative things. I could never really get away from it. Like, even if I tried, I was just always doing stuff. And so it came to a point, I actually started in business administration. And I got through that and I was like, I can't do this. Like, I need to do something else because I'm like losing my mind. I need to like be making art or something. I transferred to Dub where I did a fine arts mixed media bachelor's for a little bit, but it still didn't feel quite right. I really enjoyed doing it, but I guess I wanted more of a challenge. I wanted to kind of figure out how to combine art to solve problems or something that I could work with more people on. It was a very solo kind of thing. And so I ended up finding this design bachelor's at Lake Washington Tech. And that's what I'm doing now. And that's been super awesome because it feels like the best of both worlds of we get to solve problems and we get to make art and we get to do like all the cool things that I've always wanted to kind of work on. So that's where
All
I'm
right.
at now.
First of all, yes, you grew up in a creative house because any family who had a Star Wars wedding just wins. Part of what makes you interesting is when you started at UW and I met you. So, context.
Mhm.
Your dad came into work one day and said, "My daughter's a creative. Can you talk to her?" That was my intro. Sure. Like, no idea if you like wrote poetry, no idea what you did. So you and I sat down for lunch. You were in school. Were telling me how horrible the experience was in your first school. And I'm not going to let you sneak out because I think it's really important to hear that side of it. Why was it so bad and why was it killing you creatively?
I mean, and I guess to just preface it is UW is a good school, and I know lots of people have like a wonderful experience, but it wasn't a fit for me. Of the classes were super big, resources were kind of spread a little thin, and I guess that's what I kind of meant by there wasn't much, like it was a very isolated thing, is I didn't really get to talk with the professors. I mean, there were so many people in the class. I didn't really get to talk to many of the people, and so it was just hard to kind of pick everyone's brains and like figure out their creative process. And it was hard to get advice on where I was lacking in my processes. And it just kind of felt like I was going through the whole thing by myself. If I wanted to have that experience, I would just Google YouTube videos and teach myself for free. It was frustrating. I wanted a little more guidance, and I just wasn't getting it there. I will mention at Bellevue College, where I started and I got that business administration's associates. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I was like, this is a general degree. This is a good start. Not for me, but I had an art class actually as a part of that, the degree requirements. And I met one of like the best art teachers I've ever had. That's what I liked about that class is she would come up to your easel. She would be like, this part's wrong. And she'd just take your eraser and like erase the whole chunk. I loved it because I was like, yes, I'm getting feedback. I know exactly where I'm missing. Like, and I like how she's not afraid to start over. And that was actually an exercise she had us do too, is she had us spend like an entire class session drawing. And she was like, okay, great, shred your drawing. And she had us just shred it. She's like, you need to not be afraid to like start over, figure it out. And you can't be overly attached to your stuff because you're gonna need to change it a lot of times. It's very hard to get things perfect on the first try. She wanted us to learn that very early, and then she just kept reinforcing it with her teaching methods. And it was awesome. And I loved it. It was frustrating. I won't lie. It's obviously not the best feeling to be like, oh, half my drawing's gone. That's fine. But, it was good. I knew it was good for me.
And I love that you are still a student, Emma. And what I'm hearing is you're still processing a lot of different advice. And like you mentioned, your parents have two very different creative processes. You're looking for other people to talk to about process and the way that you're in the world. As someone who went to art school a little bit later in life, as well as taught at an art school, I think it's really helpful to hear your story because I think a lot of people go to school kind of just deal with the education they get as opposed to advocating for themselves. When I met you at DesignerCon, it was very clear to me that you have an idea of what you like and what you don't like, and you're willing to make those pivots of even changing schools, changing majors, like you said, not keeping the process too precious or your work too precious. And so I'd love to hear about how that process was for you. Like, what was it like to decide that this wasn't for you and that you were willing to transfer schools, transfer majors, look for something else? Could you kind of walk us through that a little bit more?
It was definitely a journey for sure, and a lot of work. And I learned a lot about Washington State degree requirements. I guess I started out with the business associates, like I said, because it was kind of a general degree and I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. Like I said, I've always been creative, and I was lucky enough to grow up with like incredibly creative parents. So I always kind of gravitated towards the creative field. My experience with the creative field was pretty minimal. I didn't really know very many people who were graphic designers. I didn't really know very many artists. I didn't know very many writers. I didn't know very many people within the creative community who were actually kind of making this a lifestyle and a job. And I just didn't have much exposure. To me, the creative field was kind of scary because it was like just this unknown of like, I'm drawn to it. I'm like fascinated by it, but I have no idea how it works. And honestly, to some degree, I still don't really know how it works. I'm still figuring it out, and I still haven't really gotten into it quite yet. But after I did that business degree, felt like I was just beating my head against a wall. Like it just didn't feel like it was working. I wasn't really interested in it. I couldn't see myself doing anything in it. I had some administrative jobs, and those were fine, but I always found myself continuing to go back to art and continuing to keep drawing and just wanting to do that all the time, especially with that art class during my business degree. That was probably the biggest factor. I took that art class and I was like, I love everything about this. I love the challenge. I love the work. I just love obsessing over this. And at that point, I was like, I have no idea what I want to do with this, but I need to keep doing art. So that was kind of my first, the little planting the seed in my brain there of like, I need to do this. So once I got my associates, I was like, I have to change degrees somehow. I was always kind of planning on getting my associates at Bellevue and then transferring. So that was kind of already in the plan for me. I just didn't know what my major was going to be. I went to UW, originally signed up and got into, I went all around because I thought I might have go into the School of Business, but I kept going back to art. And so I looked up their art program combined with like, they have a design program as well. And I actually applied for that. Waste of time. Like, you don't have enough material to apply to. And so I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll do art. You know, I love art anyways. And so I ended up doing that. Like I said, that seed of like, I just need to keep doing this. And again, there was like, I said it wasn't the fit for me, but I did get a lot out of it. I still liked the work and I liked obsessing over this thing and I liked working on it all the time and working around the clock on it. And it was just like, it didn't feel like work. It was just like, I don't know, it was super exciting for me. But like I said, I just felt like I wasn't getting the guidance and teamwork kind of that I wanted from it. As I was getting through my degree, I also was like struggling with finding application. You know, I wanted to have a job out of this and I didn't know. And like I said, like creative industry was this black hole of like, I didn't know what opportunities, and I still don't know what opportunities are in there. You know, I thought I was like, maybe I could be an art teacher, or maybe I could try to get into a gallery, or maybe I could sell my artwork, or maybe I could work commission wise. At the end, I was like, I don't know how to start all these things. And I was like, and I don't know how to apply this to the world. I mean, not to knock art, like art is beautiful and I think it's super important, but I felt like it wasn't necessarily what I felt like I needed to be doing. Like, I feel like some people are able to do art and they are doing like super important work in terms of philosophically or just exploring like how talented and amazing and capable like mankind can be, having either that or having some kind of like philosophical question or debate, all the wonderful things that art is able to do. And I feel like I wasn't quite able to do that, and I wasn't able to make that kind of impact that so many talented artists are able to do. And so I wanted to keep being creative and continue doing art, but I was like, how can I kind of add a more technical element to that? Because I also have like this draw to math, and I've always liked math and science, and I've always been fascinated by that. So I was like, how can I combine both? And so design kind of seemed like the logical next step. After I was kind of frustrated by UW, I started looking for design programs, and I found that design program in Kirkland at LW Tech. And what excited me about LW Tech is it's a technical school. And so they teach technical skills, and is what I was kind of looking to pair with kind of the creative. I wanted something to really tack down the abstractness of the creative field with like technical skill. And so I went into that hoping to find that. And I think finding it so far.
It was a beautiful answer because I think you hit on a lot of key things. As a creative person, you know you're creative, but they don't tell you what's the options, where you go to school, what you can do with this. I'm just going to say society for lack of a better way of saying, oh, you're going to be a plumber, go this way. Oh, you want to be a doctor, go this way. But with creatives, they don't tell you where to go and how to go. You start school and they go, what do you mean you don't have a portfolio? Well, I wasn't doing much art in art classes in high school. Sorry, I was finding myself. Well, you can't come to art school then, right?
Yeah.
That's what you ran into. And then when you get there, you don't know what you can do with it. Where can you go with it? How many art people work at Microsoft? Like, you wouldn't think of that, right? So I think you were hitting on some great points, Emma, is what I'm driving to. And one of the reasons I love talking to you, and you started hitting on it, you have one of the most analytical minds in a creative field I've ever seen. Right, here's you're doing creative, and I got this intellect, this mathematical mind. How do I put them together is where you're finding yourself right now. And you found this school, and you're starting to do more design graphics. I'm curious, how do you approach this creative and your mathematical side and use them together? Because I've seen you do it, and it's fascinating to watch you engineer art is the only way I can describe it. Your approach is much more analytical. So when you start something, how are you thinking of it?
That's actually funny you mentioned that, because my professor often makes fun of me. I do throw spaghetti on the wall. That's the secret. The best way I can kind of discuss it is in class we learn two different types of thinking. We learn, it's reductive, but it's like a good guideline. We have divergent thinking, which is where you start with one idea and then you go in a million different directions. And then there's convergent thinking. So you start from a million different directions and you get to one idea. My method is I like to throw spaghetti at the wall in the sense that I like to have like this one thought and I go in a million different directions. And then I like to figure out which direction I like best and converge back into it and just really strengthen that like, pathway, if that makes sense. So that's one way I do things. Or with artwork, at least, I usually like to think of like a theme or a philosophical idea that I want to explore or a story I want to tell. And I'm like, how do I tell the story through this image? And like, what am I telling the viewer by selecting certain colors or doing certain things or having certain hand movements or whatever it is? I like to work on all the pieces, which I guess is in a sense of divergent and convergent back and forth. I guess I just go about it that way. I think it's what you do too.
Not even close. It's not even close to what I do. Yeah, it's fascinating because even what you describe when you think of it, I don't even think that much. You have a very analytical mind on it. So I love it.
Thank you.
This is super interesting to me, Emma, because I feel like the way I think about my process is very similar to yours of like having one thread and then you're kind of exploring different ideas and coming back to it. But in terms of weaving maybe either technology or math or design into your work, I'd love to kind of hear more about, you're talking about this idea of maybe divergence and then convergence with artwork. I assume you're doing the same thing with more design pieces or your design work? Or is there any difference between how you're approaching something that might be more for yourself or more of a form of expression as opposed to solving a problem?
I guess it is. It works a little bit more intuitively, or I guess I think of it more intuitively, but I'll have like a feeling. It has been on my mind lately, and I will try to figure out kind of the same, I guess the same way of like, how do I materialize this? Like, how do I make it into an image? And again, just figuring out what colors go with this feeling or like what shapes go with this feeling. But going back into design, there's like this weird base like level of design that no one knows why it works, but it just does. Like why have people have certain, draw just color combinations than others? They're, just forms of wavelengths. Like why do some people like the color blue over the color purple? Like there's no real reason other than just like blue. And so my art kind of operates more on that kind of weird woo kind of mystery of like there's just certain colors that convey this emotion or feeling more than others, and so I choose that. And then there's certain shapes that convey that, and so I kind of start with that. But I do have that, or I have like, and I guess I kind of just do it all at once of like, I have this feeling and then this image. And so I try to workshop that together, I guess, if that makes sense. So I'm still, I guess, thinking about it to some degree.
I'm going to maybe switch gears for us a little bit. And I know you mentioned when I first asked kind of about how you thought about switching schools and making pivoting and advocating for yourself. You mentioned, I think a lot of people who have ever gone through an art program know it's actually a lot more work than most people think. They're like, oh, you just paint all the time. I'm like, no, we have to paint all of the time. Like, you don't get it. But I'd love to hear about how you think about the challenges and the difficulty of that hard work, or maybe if you could just share like what's been tough about this journey for you so far.
I mean, you definitely got sentiment right of like you have to paint all the time. And there's also like a degree of like understanding material wise of like what kind of paints are you working with? What pigments are you working with? How are they reactive with light? In school, we built our own canvases. Like, what kind of material are you working with? So you just have to have this really crazy deep understanding of the materials before you even start a piece. So like learning all that through like trial and error or research is like crazy intense. And you have to actually make your piece. Again, I had another art teacher that brought this up of creating an artwork is you have to look at your subject in a very different way than you would normally. There's like a degree of mindfulness to it, and you're not just looking at the whole thing, but you're looking at like the shapes the shadows make or the shapes the highlights make or how it's like interacting and how space and color and everything is folding around it. In a way, it's this really crazy philosophical way to look at something that's really hard. And so it's really hard to like figure out that exact shape and how like space like bends around that dark spot, whatnot. That's really hard to get down. And then you have to like, you're constantly fixing it and kind of fighting with yourself because you want to see like the thing as a whole right away, but you have to build it piece by piece. It's like, for me at least, you're constantly like going back and forth between trying to like immediately throw it up there and understanding that you have to slow down and like paint every little bit before it becomes a whole. I remember we were doing like an art final and I had painted the still life and someone had moved the still life. I'm like, I'm not done yet. Like, I still had things to work on. I was like, that's it. Like, we're gonna just do this all at once. And so I scraped like my canvas off. I started brand new. It was due the next day. And I literally stayed in the art room like from, I want to say like as soon as I got out of class, which had to be like 3 p.m. and I stayed till like 3 a.m. Like 12 hours just like constantly painting. I ran out of paint. I had to like run down because the art store was like closing and I was like, I gotta get new paint. And so I was running across campus, a ton of work. Yeah. And I feel like you said, like a lot of people are like, oh, it's just painting. It's fun. And it's like, no, you're challenging yourself to see the world completely differently. And you are just working around the clock to figure that out. That was a lot for me. And I think that was the hardest part of my time at UW was probably that.
And I think Instagram has kind of made it look like, oh, look, you just do this and your art's done. It's not the 12 hours just to do a still life and everything else. So when you run into these challenges and everything else, I'm curious, how do you push through them? What motivates you mentally, creatively to just continue the creative struggle that we all face all the time?
I don't know, maybe something's wrong with me. I like obsession, maybe like complete and total obsession. I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you. There's just such a like, I don't know. I have like such a drive of like, I know what this is supposed to look like. I have this image in my head. I'm seeing it. It needs to look like this. I can see this is wrong. We can do better. That constant cycle of like, we can do better. We can do more. We're capable of this. And just having that be a driving force. And in all honesty, that I don't have that all the time. Like sometimes I get to a point where I'm like, I have no idea what more I can do with this. Like I'm so frustrated, I'm not getting it right. And there's sometimes I have to like put it down for a while. But there's always kind of been something that draws me back to that. So even if I'm putting it down, I'm like, you know, I see it in the corner of my room or I see it on my saved files and I'm like, oh, I could work on that a little bit more and then pick it back up again. I guess in summary, I don't know.
Emma, is there I know like it may feel like, oh, you're starting, you haven't really even started your creative journey yet, or you're just at the beginning. But I think for a lot of us who have been working or doing creative work for a very long time, it's easy to forget what it's like to be at that start of the journey. And so I'd love it if you could weigh in on what would you tell other creatives who are just getting started? What advice would you give to your peers or people who are maybe a year or two behind you?
Probably just if you love it, keep going. I guess kind of like what Chris said is it's hard to like figure out that pathway, gravitate towards this way of thinking and this way of being, and whatever way you end up, if you can figure out how to use that and how to follow that lifestyle, just keep going. There's not a lot like in terms of guidance and it can be scary, but I guess a piece of advice that my professor gave me, my current professor, that has really helped me is a lot of people are creative and that if you've found that pathway, you've just found it earlier than a lot of people. So a lot of people are struggling with the same kind of issues you're struggling with, but aren't even near the path that they need to be in terms of what they're truly capable. And so you're already off to a really good start. You know, just have faith in yourself. And his other piece of advice to me was whatever you do, do it authentically. Because no matter what it is that you're doing, if you do it with authenticity and you're genuine, you're going to do just fine. And that was his piece of advice. And I don't know, something about that just resonates with me of like, I do believe there is quite a bit of truth to that.
A question I just wanted to ask, since you brought up the idea of authenticity, how do you know when you're doing something or you're creating something from a very authentic place?
I think a lot of times it's intuitive, and when it's not, that's something else actually my professor mentioned of you'll know, like it won't work, people won't like it. It'll just, it makes the wrong note. It just doesn't resonate like it should. And so he's like, You'll know when it's authentic because it'll feel good to you and people will like it. It will make sense. Like it will resonate on a deep level that we don't necessarily understand. It's the song that you make in your heart and you're figuring out how to make the right notes. And I think you kind of do that intuitively.
And your journey has actually been doing that. You didn't know you start college not in a creative thing. Your heart wasn't right, right? Your heart has kept you going to where you are now without you realizing this, right?
Pretty intuitively, yeah. But I was also, I guess, yeah, it was like I was doing business associate and I hated it and it felt like I was banging my head against the wall. And not only that, but I was just bad at it. I was bad at it. I was bad at accounting. I couldn't keep track of all these numbers. I was a secretary for a while and I was not a good secretary. Like it was just not something authentic to me. And even though I had a degree in all these things, like I
It's not
just,
you.
it wasn't working.
Wow. So now you're following your heart. How are you making sure that your heart stays true with what you're doing? Your heart's pulling you one way and your head's pulling the other way, Emma. How are you using that to further yourself? Because I think that would really help some people who listen in on this, and even old people like me who's still trying to figure out this whole internal conflict because you've done amazing with it.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Sometimes I'm not entirely sure of how well I'm doing. I guess going back to that piece of advice my professor said is it just feels right. I feel like I'm getting closer to doing something and figuring out a field or working with people that I can kind of operate with both the analytical and the heart. And I'm not sure because, like I said, it's kind of like this black hole of creative field. So who knows if it'll work out. But from just what I'm learning in school and working with people who have, like my professor ran several firms before he taught, and just talking with him and how his experience in that field, it's promising. It seems right, at least for me, of like being able to basically work creatively but analytically at the same time, if that makes sense. One topic we talk about a lot is like wicked problems and stuff like that. So like for those who don't know, like wicked problems are problems that are not capable of being solved like right off the bat. They don't have one solution. They're not solved easily or overnight. Like they're problems that take multiple solutions and multiple years to solve. So like global warming is like a big wicked problem of our time. We discussed a lot about that of like how do you create creative solutions that can reach people that can contribute to this wicked problem. And that process, you have to work creatively because you're like, how do we get people to really feel and connect with this problem? Like, how do we get to people and communicate this on an emotional level? That takes like a lot of creativity, and you're dealing with a lot of abstract concepts. And like I said, like at the kind of under woo hole of like, how do you make people feel things? And artists are really great at that. Artists are fantastic at making people feel things. So you need to have art with that. And then at the same time, you're like, how do we direct that to cultivate action or change? Or how do we deploy this in certain ways that we can actually start working towards solving this problem, which is a super analytical thing. And so you're dealing with both when trying to solve this problem. And so I'm trying to figure out design firms that work like that or places that are very similar. Maybe not solving global warming. That's probably a bigger chunk than I can chew at this point, but working kind of like that of using creativity and analyticalness to make like real change and impact.
That's what design is all about. Creative problem solving at the end of the day. No matter where you choose to pursue in terms of a career, I think you're going to know what's a good fit. And I think there's a lot of positive impact that you can make from your thoughtfulness and matching that thoughtfulness with the creativity. This has been a super awesome conversation to have with you. Thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you?
That's a good question. Kind of going back to, like I said, I'm still kind of in my own world right now. I'm not very far out there, but yeah, probably just LinkedIn at this point. I have a LinkedIn account, but yeah, I don't have a lot of my work out there, so hopefully that'll change. I'm in my last year of school, so hopefully I'll be able to have some finished stuff to show.
I'm going to throw you a silly one to end our show. You have introduced me to some amazing artists. And what are some of your favorite artists and motivate you?
I'm so bad with names, and I completely forgot his name. He's incredibly talented. Yeah, he's definitely someone who inspires me. He has a website called Labor Camp, and he studied like poster design and propaganda. So he has some really interesting posters that he's made a lot over the pandemic. Oh man, it's a Polish name. I'm so sorry, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. It's Piotr. And then his last name is Zyhalski. Sisalski. He's wonderfully talented. I should probably know how to pronounce his name. He's very inspiring. And then I'd have to say, like, Chris, you've been such an inspiration to me too. Yeah, don't shake your head no. Yes. Yes, absolutely. You were like one of the
Thank you.
voices that you were a reassurance of, like, I was getting into this industry that I knew nothing about. It was confusing. There was not a lot of guidance. Honestly, we're one of the only people that were like, you can do it. Like, there is pathways and there's places, and then you were doing it and you're doing so great at it. That was super inspiring. And your work is so fun. And like I said, I talked about your black and white work, and I love that. And your negative space is incredible. And you've been an inspiration to me for sure.
Thank you very much. You're going to make me blush over here. So I appreciate it. But it's been a two-way street. You've taught me so much, so we're equal.
I don't know about that, but
I'll break up the love fest.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
Emma,
Because
is
I'm getting-
there any last words that you would like our listeners to know?
keep it on. Keep being creative. Be authentic. Do your thing. Just go easy on yourself. Love yourself. It takes time sometimes, but I'm confident. I think my professor has been right this whole time of, like, if you're authentic, you're going to figure it out. So don't stress yourself out too much. Keep on keeping on.
Rick Rubin said the secret is I don't create music for anyone else but myself. And if it's true to myself, it'll be true to anybody else. And you went, yeah, that's true. That's like the 1950s. And they were trying to mass produce stuff.
So, like, the design industry kind of came mainstream really like the 1950s, like the Mad Men and all that kind of stuff. It came into kind of pop.
Right. But you were saying, why was painting started?
Yeah. So painting, I think design is doing a very similar thing of what fine arts is doing and has been doing, which is, fine arts originally started as painting portraits of rich people to show how rich and affluent and cultured you were. And like, that was it. That was all art was for. It was basically very narrow. And then with the birth of photography, it freed art to do something more. Because photography did what art was doing, which is to capture an image in its exactness. You were able to do it so much quicker, and so art was no longer really needed for that kind of stuff. And so art kind of naturally, our nature as humans evolved into something more abstract and more exploratory and more philosophical. It was able to ask the hard questions. Art was a way to ask super hard questions about contents of a person's soul, what was going on politically, or how do I make someone feel something using just one brush stroke, like stuff like that was working on like a really super abstract crazy level. And it was doing that without necessarily seeking popular approval. It didn't need a client list of rich people to paint. It was just doing that to ask questions and to just make something. And so my theory was with design is, it started out very similar of how do we mass appeal and how do we manufacture. Design was very rigid to some degree. And so I think it's slowly evolving into something maybe a little bit more abstract, and that's asking more philosophical questions. And actually, it's what I'm studying in school right now. Is a large part of it is environmental graphic design. which is like basically a very crazy, somewhat new design field of like, how do we create experiences? Like, not just like, how do you make a poster? How do you make an ad? How do you make people experience something? And how do you tell a story? And how do you communicate, whether it's a museum or a brand or a person, communicate them to the world? How do you express them? And how do you express that through an experience? It's a super wildly philosophical field that's been super cool to explore. And I think that's becoming more and more popular. And I think people are looking for those experiences more and more. People are in tune to that. And I think it's largely liked. I think that's why there's been a boom in like the indie music, indie art, indie film kind of industry, is people like things that are authentic and that are true to the artist and they aren't mass manufactured. And we're at a kind of point in our history where people are excited about that and willing to explore it. Kind of feels like Impressionism first came, of like people willing to look at it finally, and it was willing to be asked finally. We were just at that point, the stars aligned. And so I think we're kind of coming to that point, or I hope we are, because that's what I'm learning. I'd like it to be applicable. It's kind of my theory, my crazy thought process.
I totally agree with you too. And it drives me nuts. Like everyone's so freaked about AI art and we're going to lose everything. And I keep arguing we're not. It's just another tool. Like, how do you, and it's going to change art again. Like, because an AI can only build what's already been built before it, it can't do new.
Yeah. So you need artists, and that's a whole other debate of like, you need artists to feed the AI, and then you can't. The AI makes art for AI. It doesn't make art for people. People make art for people. So you need someone to filter the AI to be like, okay, cool, it gave me an image, but then how do I make this image applicable to a human audience? Like,
You know how it drives me nuts when people come up to me and go, "Look at the art I created." You didn't create that, the computer did. No, I did. No, you gave it 4 lines and it stole stuff and created that. That's not creativity.
yeah.
That's it created. You didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, yeah. I totally agree.
I think my whole thing, I actually I'm not sure where I'm at on AI being creative or not. Like, and I kind of don't really care because I'm looking at it more of a practical application to artists being able to express themselves and make a living at the same time. And I've sort of argued that it doesn't actually matter whether or not it's art. It's about, can creatives need to leverage storytelling more, because to your point, if you are making things without thinking about the story you're trying to tell, the emotions you're trying to create, then I guess that's the difference between maybe art and design, right? And maybe artists need to become more designers in terms of thinking about what they're trying to say. And more importantly, though, how do we articulate that message to an audience, whether that's a art director or a fine art collector or a NFT collector or whoever. I think that storytelling becomes so much more important than whether or not this is art or whether or not it's creating. We can get into the minutia of that, and I'm kind of the mind I don't really care. It's more about how do we empower real humans to be able to continue with their creativity.
I totally agree. Yeah, and I mean, in my belief, you described like what is the pure essence of art, which is storytelling and personal exploration or philosophical exploration. Like I said, like the creation of photography freed art to do that. So I think, and this is a hot take, so hopefully no one gets upset by this, but I think that's the only reason like art exists and art is around, is it is a tool to understand ourselves and the world around us and to reflect on that. And without that, like, we're completely lost out here. So it's super important. And so I totally agree with, it needs to tell stories. And no matter how you do that, like as long as you're doing it authentically, and that's all that matters. It reminds me kind of like Mark Rothko, of he had the giant swashes of color. You know, people were all like, this isn't art, this is like, what the heck is this? Which is funny and ironic because, you know, everyone was so upset with it. But then you got to ask yourself, like, how the heck did this one brushstroke make everyone so angry? Like, if it really truly doesn't matter, if it really truly isn't art, then how is it making so many people feel this one emotion? Like, and in my book, I'm like, he just successfully made art. He just made a bunch of people feel a lot of things with one color.
Thank you for joining Rick and myself on another episode of Origins, A Creative Journey, a Designer Con production. Please like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, download and listen to us every place you get your favorite podcast. Follow us on Instagram at Origins, A Creative Journey, all one word. Drop us an email for thoughts, ideas, or maybe somebody you'd like us to interview at dconpodcast@gmail.com. And make sure you join us in Las Vegas for DesignerCon, North America's premier annual design convention. All the information can be found, including tickets, at designercon.com. Till then, enjoy your own creative journey.